In the glittering steel and glass towers of the city, there are stories. Not the ones written on stock tickers or in headlines, but the ones that walk the halls silently. The ones we never see until we're forced to. This is a story about one of those invisible men and the powerful CEO who was about to learn that a person's worth is not measured by their title, but by the depths they hold within. The world of InnovateX was sharp, cold, and relentlessly fast. It was a kingdom of glass walls and polished concrete floors, a place where ambition was the air you breathed, and its king was Marcus Thorne. Marcus wasn't just a CEO, he was an architect of ego. His suits were sharper, his watch was more expensive, and his tolerance for anything less than perfection was zero. He walked through his company not like he owned it, but like he'd conquered it. His voice was a low, cutting hum that could silence a room and make grown men feel like schoolboys. He saw his employees not as people, but as assets or liabilities, cogs in the machine he had built. And then there was Elias. Elias was a shadow in this world of blinding light. He was the janitor. Every evening, as the last of the frantic coders and marketers filed out, Elias would glide in. He carried a bucket and a mop, but he also carried a silence that was profound. He was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes that held a story no one had ever bothered to ask about. His movements were deliberate, efficient, a quiet ballet of cleaning spray and microfiber cloths. He'd wipe away the fingerprints from the glass doors, mop up the expensive coffee spilled by stressed-out executives, and empty the trash cans filled with discarded dreams and half-eaten lunches. To the people of InnovateX, he was just part of the furniture. They looked past him, through him. He was invisible. The only thing they ever noticed was his accent. It was a gentle, melodic lilt, a blend of cadences you couldn't quite place. It was there in the rare moments he had to speak. "Excuse me," he'd murmur if he needed to pass, or a soft "good evening" to a departing employee who was too busy on their phone to reply. One Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was striding through the main bullpen, his COO, Olivia, trailing behind him, taking rapid notes on her tablet. Marcus was on a tirade, dissecting a marketing proposal with surgical cruelty. "This is weak, it has no teeth, no soul, it's beige, I want crimson." As they rounded a corner, they passed Elias, who was meticulously cleaning a smudge from a wall. Elias nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, sir." "Ma'am." Marcus didn't break his stride. He just gestured dismissively with his thumb over his shoulder. "That guy," he said to Olivia, his voice dripping with condescension, "we have to get a cleaning service that hires people who can at least speak clear English." "What even is that weird accent?" Olivia glanced back at Elias, who continued his work, his face betraying nothing, as if he hadn't heard. But he had. He always heard. He was invisible, but he wasn't deaf. Marcus, however, had already forgotten him, moving on to his next critique, his next demand, his next display of power. He was the king of his castle, completely oblivious to the fact that the most brilliant man in the building was the one cleaning his floors. He saw a janitor with a funny accent, not a guardian of secrets, a holder of forgotten knowledge. He saw a man to be dismissed, not a man who would soon hold the entire future of his company in his hands. Marcus believed he was in complete control, that his world was ordered and predictable. But chaos was about to spill into his perfect kingdom, and it would come in the form of a dark roast coffee stain. In the world of high-stakes business, perception is reality. A single crack in the facade of perfection can shatter a multi-million-dollar deal. Marcus Thorne had spent years building a flawless facade for InnovateX, and today that facade was everything. Today was the day of the Ikeda deal. Ikeda Corp, a titan of technology from Tokyo, was considering a massive investment, a partnership that would launch InnovateX into the global stratosphere. Their top executives were on their way, and Marcus was wound tighter than a watch spring. Everything had to be perfect. The conference room was pristine, the numbers were triple-checked, and the presentation was a masterpiece of corporate storytelling, or at least it was supposed to be. The centerpiece of the presentation was a massive, custom-made white magnetic board. On it, Marcus planned to diagram his vision, a spontaneous-looking but meticulously rehearsed flourish of genius. He saw himself at that board, marker in hand, dazzling the Japanese investors with his brilliance. 5 minutes before they were scheduled to arrive, Marcus, buzzing with a mixture of caffeine and adrenaline, swept into the boardroom. "Olivia, the final projections now," he commanded. He was holding a large, steaming cup of black coffee. As he turned, gesticulating wildly about market share, his elbow caught the edge of the conference table. Time seemed to slow down. The cup of dark roast coffee flew through the air in a perfect, horrifying arc. It collided with the dead center of the brilliant white presentation board. A grotesque spiderwebbing stain of dark brown instantly soaked into the porous surface. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. For a full second, there was dead silence, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of coffee running down the board and onto the plush grey carpet. Then, chaos erupted. "No, no, no!" Marcus roared, his face turning a shade of crimson that matched the vision he'd wanted for his marketing. He threw his hands up in the air, a gesture of pure, unadulterated fury. "Get this off, now!" His assistant, a young, perpetually terrified man named Kevin, rushed forward with a handful of napkins. He dabbed at the stain, which only seemed to smear it, making it worse. "Not like that, you idiot!" Marcus screamed, his voice echoing in the tense room. "Where are the cleaning supplies, the professional ones, the ones we pay a fortune for?" Kevin scurried out of the room, his face pale. Olivia was on her phone, trying to frantically reschedule to buy them a few more minutes, but the investor's car was already pulling up. The pressure in the room was immense, a physical weight. This wasn't just a coffee stain, it was a symbol. It was a flaw in the armor, a sign of imperfection and chaos in a company that sold itself on precision and control. The deal, worth over $50 million, felt like it was dissolving along with the fibers of the whiteboard. Marcus paced like a caged tiger, muttering curses under his breath, berating everyone and everything. He was a man watching his perfectly constructed world crumble before his very eyes, all because of a single, clumsy mistake. In his moment of panic, surrounded by his highly paid Ivy League-educated team, none of them had a solution. But a solution was about to come from the most unexpected corner of the room, from the man nobody ever saw. Panic is a powerful lens. It can make mountains out of molehills and monsters out of shadows. For Marcus Thorne, the coffee stain on the board was a monster, one that threatened to devour his ambition whole. His team, usually so confident and decisive, was frozen, caught in the crossfire of his fury and their own helplessness. They threw every expensive, store-bought cleaner they could find at the stain. Glass cleaner, all-purpose spray, whiteboard cleaner that promised to remove anything. Nothing worked. The brown blotch remained, a defiant mockery of their efforts. It was in this moment of collective failure that a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was soft, hesitant, and carried that familiar, unplaceable accent. Everyone turned. It was Elias. He had been quietly cleaning the windows on the far side of the boardroom, a ghost in the background of their corporate drama. He now stood near the door, holding a simple cloth in his hand, his expression calm and earnest. He took a small step forward, his gaze fixed on the ruined board. "I can fix this," he said again, a little louder this time, though his voice was still gentle. Marcus spun around, his eyes blazing. He looked at Elias as if he were a bug that had crawled out from under a rock. It was a look of pure, undiluted disdain. "You," Marcus scoffed, a humorless, ugly laugh escaping his lips. "You can fix it?" He gestured around the room at his panicked team. "My executive team, with their master's degrees and their six-figure salaries, can't fix it. But you, the janitor, you have the magic touch." The sarcasm was a weapon, designed to wound, to put Elias back in his place. Elias didn't flinch. He just met Marcus's gaze with a steady, almost unnerving calm. "Yes, sir, I think so." "And how do you plan to do that?" Marcus sneered, crossing his arms. "Are you going to wipe it with that dirty rag you're holding? Are you going to mumble some ancient curse at it?" He took a step towards Elias, invading his personal space, using his height and his expensive suit to intimidate. "We are in the middle of a crisis here. We are trying to close the biggest deal in this company's history. We don't have time for your games. Get out. Go back to your mops, or whatever it is you do." He waved his hand dismissively, a flick of the wrist that said, "You are nothing, you are not welcome here." The rest of the team looked on, some with pity for Elias, others with embarrassment for their boss. But no one dared to speak up. Marcus's word was law. To be dismissed by him so publicly was a corporate death sentence. Elias stood his ground for a moment longer. a silent plea in his eyes. He wasn't pleading for himself, but for them, for the solution he knew he possessed. But seeing the wall of arrogance in front of him, he simply gave a slow, respectful nod. He turned and shuffled quietly out of the boardroom, the ghost retreating back into the shadows. Marcus turned his back on him, his attention snapping back to the unsolvable problem on the board. He had dismissed the only man who could help him, but Elias was not a man easily deterred by arrogance, because he understood something Marcus didn't. Knowledge is its own form of power. Sometimes the greatest wisdom doesn't come from a textbook or a boardroom. It comes from places of love, from hands that have worked, from memories passed down through generations. It's a quiet, humble knowledge, often overlooked in a world that values noise and spectacle, and it was this quiet knowledge that was about to re-enter the room. Marcus had fully turned his back, convinced the janitor was gone for good. His frustration had boiled over into a cold fury. "Useless," he muttered, glaring at his team. "The whole lot of you." The air was thick with the stench of failure and burnt coffee. The investors were being held in the lobby, and their patience was wearing thin. Olivia was starting to look desperate, knowing the window of opportunity was closing with every passing second. And then the boardroom door opened again, so quietly that at first no one noticed. Elias slipped back inside. He wasn't empty-handed this time. From his simple grey janitorial cart, he had retrieved a small, clear, unmarked spray bottle. It was filled with a crystal-clear liquid. He walked not towards Marcus, but towards the stained board, his steps measured and confident. He held up the bottle. "Please," he said, his voice steady. "I ask only for a moment." Marcus whirled around, ready to unleash another volley of insults. "I told you to get out. Are you deaf as well as incompetent?" But this time, something was different. Elias wasn't asking for permission in a timid way. He was making a statement of fact. He held the bottle with a certainty that was jarring. In his heavily accented, sometimes broken English, he explained, "This is from my home. My grandmother. She teach me very old way, for inks for stains. It is gentle, but strong." He looked directly at Marcus, his eyes holding no fear, only a deep, unwavering conviction. Before Marcus could explode, Olivia stepped in. She saw the desperation in the room and the strange, quiet confidence radiating from the old janitor. She saw the unmarked bottle not as a joke, but as a last, improbable hope. "Marcus, wait," she said, her voice firm. She turned to him, speaking in a low, urgent tone. "What have we got to lose? Everything we've tried has failed. The deal is already dead if they walk in and see this. Let him try." Her logic was undeniable. They were at rock bottom. Marcus looked from Olivia's pleading face to Elias's calm one. He hated it. He hated the idea of being saved by the janitor he had just mocked. It was a blow to his pride, a crack in his armor of superiority. He let out a long, exasperated sigh, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time all day. "Fine," he snapped, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. "Fine, do it. But if you make this worse, I swear—" He didn't finish the threat, letting it hang in the air. He stepped back, crossing his arms and narrowing his eyes. A king forced to watch a peasant perform a magic trick in his court. He was already preparing his next tirade, fully expecting this little experiment to fail, ready to blame Elias for the final, catastrophic nail in the coffin. He expected failure. He expected to be proven right. But what he was about to witness would not only clean a stain, it would begin to wipe away the foundations of his own arrogance. The room held its breath. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. Everyone's eyes, the powerful CEO, the sharp COO, the frantic team, were fixed on the old janitor and his small, unassuming bottle. Elias seemed unfazed by the pressure. He approached the stained whiteboard with the reverence of a craftsman approaching his work. There was no theatrical flourish, no grand gesture. There was only a quiet focus. He gently shook the clear liquid in the unmarked bottle, a soft, swishing sound in the silent room. He then aimed the nozzle at the heart of the dark, ugly coffee stain. He sprayed once. A fine mist settled over the brown blotch. He sprayed again. And then, something impossible happened. It didn't just fade. It vanished. The dark coffee stain, which had seemed permanently bonded to the board, which had resisted every chemical and every frantic scrub, simply dissolved. One moment it was there, a symbol of their failure. The next, it was gone. Not a trace, Not a shadow, not a hint of discoloration remained. The surface of the board was pristine, brilliant, impossibly white, as if it had just been unboxed. The liquid seemed to evaporate on contact, leaving nothing behind but perfection. A collective audible gasp went through the room. Someone whispered, "No way." Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Kevin, the terrified assistant, just stared, his jaw hanging open. They looked from the perfect white board back to Elias, and then back to the board, as if their eyes were deceiving them. It was like watching a magic trick, but they all knew it was real. The smell of coffee was gone, replaced by a faint, clean scent they couldn't identify. Marcus was frozen. His arms were still crossed, his posture still defiant, but his face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His brain couldn't process the input. The janitor, the man with the weird accent. The invisible man had just performed a small, quiet miracle. He had done what Marcus and his entire high-powered team could not. He had solved the unsolvable problem. Just then, Kevin's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his eyes wide with renewed panic. "Sir, that was reception. The Ikeda delegation is on its way up. They're on the elevator." The spell was broken. Marcus snapped back to reality, but his reality had been fundamentally altered. He looked at Elias, then at the board. There was no time for questions, no time for thanks. His instinct for self-preservation took over. He snatched the pristine board, barking at his team, "Let's go! Places, everyone! Look sharp!" He didn't acknowledge Elias. He didn't offer a word of gratitude. He simply took the solution and pretended the problem had never existed. His world was righted, and he shoved the man who fixed it back into the margins. Elias simply nodded. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't seem to expect it. He watched them scramble into position, a flicker of something unreadable in his calm, wise eyes. He picked up his small bottle, tucked it back into his cart, and retreated to the corner of the room to continue his work. The silent, invisible man once more. The immediate crisis was over, but the universe had a funny way of teaching lessons. Marcus thought the problem was solved, but he was about to face a much bigger one, a barrier that no cleaning solution could ever hope to erase. With the whiteboard gleaming and the team snapped back into formation, the mask of corporate perfection was firmly back in place. The doors to the boardroom swished open, and the Ikeda Corp delegation entered. They were led by Mr. Nakamura, a stern, older gentleman whose face was hard to read. With him were several executives and, crucially, their lead engineer, Mr. Tanaka. The initial greetings were smooth. Marcus was back in his element, charming and confident, his earlier panic completely hidden. He launched into his presentation, his voice resonating with power as he stood before the miraculously clean board. He was brilliant. He painted a picture of synergy and profit, of market disruption and innovation. The Japanese executives nodded along, their expressions polite, occasionally murmuring to their translator. Olivia watched, feeling a cautious sense of relief. They had dodged a bullet. The presentation reached its technical climax, where Marcus outlined the groundbreaking proprietary algorithm that powered their new software. He finished with a flourish, a confident smile on his face. "And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions." Mr. Nakamura spoke to his lead engineer, Mr. Tanaka, who then posed a long, complex question in Japanese. The translator, a young American man hired for the meeting, listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He then turned to Marcus and began to translate. "Mr. Tanaka asks about the latency protocol within the quantum encryption matrix. He wants to know how you mitigate signal decay during cascaded data string processing." The translator stumbled over the words. It was clear the highly technical jargon was at the very limit of his ability. Marcus gave a polished, pre-prepared answer, but when the translator relayed it back to Mr. Tanaka, the engineer shook his head, looking dissatisfied. He spoke again, this time more rapidly, with more urgency, pointing to a specific diagram on the board. The translator looked completely lost. "Sir, I'm sorry. He's using a very specific engineering term. It's something about resonant frequency phasing. I'm not familiar with the concept in this context." A cold dread began to creep back into the room. The smooth facade was cracking again. Mr. Tanaka tried again, speaking slowly, but the nuance was everything. The translator was failing, and the bridge of communication was collapsing. The entire deal, the $50 million prize, was getting stuck on a single vital point of technical misunderstanding. Mr. Nakamura's polite expression was hardening into one of concern. He valued precision above all else. A partner who couldn't even communicate their own technology clearly was not a partner he wanted. Marcus started to sweat. This was a problem he couldn't solve with arrogance or a loud voice. He looked at his own CTO, who seemed just as confused by the translation barrier. The perfect image, the illusion of flawless competence he had worked so hard to project, was crumbling into dust. The air grew thick with awkward silence. The deal was slipping through his fingers, not because of a flaw in the tech, but because of a failure to connect, to be understood. He was powerless, and he hated it. Olivia looked on, her heart sinking. They were so close, only to fail at the final hurdle. All eyes were on the failing translator and the frustrated engineer. No one was looking at the corner of the room, where the janitor was quietly tying up the trash bag. No one until he stepped out of the shadows. The silence in the boardroom wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the sound of a multi-million-dollar opportunity dying. The translator was sweating, flipping through a digital dictionary, finding nothing. Mr. Tanaka was growing visibly frustrated, shaking his head. Marcus was trapped, a captain on a sinking ship with no life raft in sight. He was about to concede, to suggest they table the discussion, a move he knew would be a fatal blow to the deal. And in that moment of absolute deadlock, a voice emerged from the edge of the room, a voice that was quiet, yet cut through the tension like a razor. "Perhaps I can be of assistance." It was Elias. He had finished emptying the trash can and was standing respectfully by the door holding the plastic bag. Every head in the room swiveled towards him. Marcus's face contorted with a fresh wave of disbelief and anger. "Not now," he hissed, his voice a furious whisper. "Get out!" He started to rise from his chair, ready to physically remove the janitor, who had the audacity to interrupt him a second time. But he was too late. Before Marcus could stop him, Elias took 2 steps forward, set the trash bag down, and turned his attention directly to the frustrated Japanese engineer. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of pure, traditional respect. And then he spoke. What came out of his mouth stunned the room into a new dimension of silence. It wasn't the heavily accented, broken English they were used to. It was perfect, fluent, elegant Japanese. The cadence was flawless, the honorifics precise. He addressed Mr. Tanaka directly, with a calm authority that was utterly transformative. Mr. Tanaka's eyes, which had been narrowed in frustration, shot wide open in astonishment. He leaned forward, listening intently as Elias spoke. He then responded with a rapid-fire burst of technical Japanese. Elias nodded, his expression one of deep comprehension, and replied instantly. A high-level, complex conversation erupted between the janitor and the engineer. They weren't just talking, they were debating, clarifying, exploring intricate concepts. Elias pointed to the diagram on the board, his finger tracing the lines as he spoke about resonant frequencies and signal decay with the fluency of a native speaker and the knowledge of a seasoned expert. He wasn't just translating. He was participating. He was demonstrating a profound understanding of the very engineering principles that had stumped everyone else in the room. The official translator stood by, his mouth agape, completely redundant. Marcus sat back down in his chair, but it was less a conscious movement and more like his bones had suddenly dissolved. His entire team, Olivia included, stared at the scene, their minds struggling to reconcile the man they thought they knew, the quiet, simple janitor, with the brilliant polyglot effortlessly saving their most important deal. The king of Innovate X was being rescued, for the second time in an hour, by the man who was invisible. The mystery of the man in the corner was only deepening. He could clean impossible stains and speak perfect Japanese. But the true extent of his hidden depths was about to be revealed, and it would shatter everyone's perception of who Elias truly was. The exchange lasted for maybe 3 minutes, but for everyone else in the room, time had stopped. They watched the effortless back and forth between the janitor and the engineer, a conversation that was as complex as it was beautiful. The tension in the room had evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of awe and disbelief. Elias, using his hands to illustrate a point about data flow, smiled. Mr. Tanaka's face broke into a wide, relieved grin, and he clapped his hands together, letting out an enthusiastic exclamation in Japanese. The barrier had been broken. The connection was made. Finally, Elias gave a final respectful bow. Mr. Tanaka stood up and returned the bow with even deeper reverence, a gesture of immense respect for a peer. The engineer then turned to his own boss, Mr. Nakamura, and spoke with animated excitement. Mr. Nakamura listened, a slow smile spreading across his face. He then addressed the room through the now unnecessary translator. Mr. Tanaka's concerns have been more than satisfied, the translator relayed, his own voice filled with wonder. He says this man, he gestured towards Elias, has explained the concept more clearly than any documentation he has ever read. Ikeda Corporation is 100% confident. We have a deal. A wave of relieved cheers and applause broke out from the InnovateX team. The deal was on. The $50 million was secured. Amid the celebration and handshakes, Marcus remained seated, his gaze locked on Elias. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion, shame, and sheer astonishment. He saw Elias quietly pick up his trash bag, preparing to leave, to fade back into the wallpaper as if nothing had happened. But Olivia wouldn't let him. She moved through the celebrating crowd and gently touched Elias's arm. "Elias," she said, her voice soft and full of genuine awe. "That was incredible. How did you do that? Where did you learn to speak Japanese like that?" Elias looked down at the floor, a hint of his usual shyness returning now that the crisis was over. "It is one of my languages, ma'am," he said, his voice reverting to the familiar accented English. Marcus, who had pushed himself to his feet and approached them, overheard this. "One of your languages?" he asked, his own voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean, one of them?" Elias looked up, meeting the CEO's gaze. There was no pride in his eyes, only a simple statement of fact. "I speak 10 languages," he said quietly. He then began to list them, his voice a soft, rhythmic catalogue of his hidden life. Japanese and Spanish, French, German, Russian, Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, Portuguese, Italian. He paused and then added with the faintest hint of a smile, "And my native language, Swahili. English is my 10th. The remaining chatter in the room died down as his words hung in the air. 10 languages. The man they had ignored, the man Marcus had openly mocked for his weird accent, was a master linguist. A multilingual ghost had been walking their halls all along. He wasn't just a man who cleaned their messes. He was a man who held the keys to the world in his mind, a man who could speak to nearly every major market on the planet. The revelation was so profound, so utterly humbling, that it left the powerful CEO speechless, staring at the janitor as if seeing him for the very first time. The how had been answered, but the why remained. Why was a man who could speak 10 languages, a man of such obvious brilliance, working as a janitor? The answer would be more powerful than any business deal. A story isn't just about what happens, it's about the journey that leads to that moment. For Elias, the journey was a long and arduous one, a path paved with brilliance and heartbreak. The man who had just saved a multi-million-dollar deal with his words was about to share the story that had rendered him silent for so long. After the Japanese investors had departed, buzzing with excitement, a strange quiet fell over the InnovateX office. The news of what had happened in the boardroom spread like wildfire. Employees peered out of their cubicles, staring at Elias with a mixture of reverence and confusion. This was no longer just the janitor. This was a mystery. Marcus, still reeling, stood awkwardly to the side, unable to form words. It was Olivia who led Elias to a small, quiet seating area, away from the prying eyes. "Elias," she began, her voice filled with a gentle, sincere curiosity. "Please, help me understand." And so, Elias told his story. His English, though accented, became more fluid as he spoke, the words of his past flowing from him like a river that had finally broken through a dam. He wasn't always a janitor. In his home country of Kenya, he was Professor Elias Kimani. He spoke of a life that seemed like it belonged to another man. He had been a celebrated professor at the University of Nairobi, one of the most prestigious institutions in East Africa. He held not one, but 2 doctorates. The first, as they might have guessed, was in linguistics. It explained his mastery of 10 languages, a passion that had driven him since he was a young boy. But it was his second doctorate that caused Olivia's eyes to widen even further. It was in chemical engineering. "The cleaning solution," she whispered, connecting the dots. Elias nodded. It is a simple formulation based on enzymatic catalysts, something my grandmother taught me for berry stains, which I later refined in the lab. It breaks down organic compounds without damaging the surface material. He had invented the miracle cleaner in his garage. He spoke of a happy life, a life of respect and intellectual pursuit. He had a wife, 2 children, a beautiful home. But that life was ripped away from him. Political instability and ethnic violence swept through his region. His university became a target. Intellectuals were seen as a threat. His family's safety was compromised. They were forced to flee, becoming refugees with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the knowledge they held in their heads. They made it to the United States, a land of supposed opportunity, believing his credentials would be his salvation. But here his degrees were just pieces of paper from a place people couldn't find on a map. They weren't recognized. The process of revalidation was a bureaucratic nightmare, costing thousands of dollars and years of study he couldn't afford. He was a scholar, a professor, an engineer, but in America he was just an immigrant with an accent. He spoke of the humility of taking any job to feed his family. He chose janitorial work because the night shifts allowed him to do 2 things: be there for his children during the day and study. He spent his days in the public library, relearning calculus and chemistry and English, preparing to take the exams that would one day give him his old life back. He never complained. He never felt he was above the work. "There is dignity in all labor," he said softly. "To clean is to bring order from chaos. It is not so different from solving an equation." As his story filled the silent air of the office, it did more than just explain his past. It held up a mirror to the man who had judged him, forcing him to see the staggering ugliness of his own prejudice. There are moments in life that change you, not gradually but instantly. A single piece of information, a single story can detonate in your mind and vaporize the person you thought you were, leaving you to rebuild yourself from the ashes of your own ignorance. For Marcus Thorne, this was that moment. He had been listening from a short distance away, unseen by Elias and Olivia. Every word of Elias's story, the professorship, the 2 doctorates, the flight from violence, the unrecognized credentials, the quiet dignity in the face of immense loss, had struck him like a physical blow. The shame was overwhelming. It was a cold, heavy weight in his gut. He saw himself just hours ago sneering at this man's accent, mocking him, dismissing him, calling him incompetent. He had looked at this brilliant, resilient, scholarly man and seen nothing but a caricature, a stereotype to be belittled. The arrogance he had cultivated for years, the pride he took in his own sharp judgment, was revealed for what it was: a pathetic, shallow prejudice. He, Marcus Thorne, the great CEO, was the ignorant one. He was the one who was truly blind. He stepped out from behind the partition. Elias and Olivia looked up, startled. Marcus's face was pale. The usual mask of command and control was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, raw humility. He walked over and stood before Elias, who instinctively started to rise to his feet out of habit. "No, please," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. He held up a hand. "You sit." And then, in the middle of the open-plan office, in front of every employee who was now openly staring, the great Marcus Thorne did something no one had ever seen him do. He apologized. "Elias," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "I don't have the words. What I said to you, what I thought of you, there is no excuse. It was arrogant, it was ignorant, it was cruel. I am deeply, deeply ashamed." He looked Elias directly in the eye. "I am so sorry." But he didn't stop there. He knew a private apology wasn't enough. The insult had been public, and the lesson needed to be as well. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "I want everyone to know that this man, Elias Kimani, is the reason we are celebrating today. He saved a deal that I almost destroyed. But more than that," he continued, "he holds knowledge and character that we should all aspire to." He turned back to Elias. "A man with a doctorate in chemical engineering shouldn't be cleaning our floors, and a man who speaks 10 languages shouldn't be invisible. This is my mistake, and I'm going to correct it. Elias, I am not offering you a job. I am begging you to accept one. We need a new head of international communications and a senior advisor in our research and development wing. The positions are yours, both of them, if you'll have them." Tears welled up in Elias's eyes. He stood up slowly. A lifetime of struggle and quiet perseverance culminating in this one unbelievable moment. He looked at Marcus, at the man who had mocked him and was now offering him everything, and he saw the genuine change in his eyes. He simply nodded, a slow, dignified acceptance. "Thank you, sir," he said. "I would be honored." The office didn't just applaud, it erupted. It was a cathartic release of a toxic culture. In that moment, Innovate X was transformed. It ceased to be a kingdom of ego and became a community of respect. The final shot is not of a boardroom or a stock ticker, but of Marcus and Elias walking down the hall together days later. They are deep in conversation, not as a CEO and an employee, but as colleagues, as equals. Marcus is listening intently, and for the first time in a long time, he isn't thinking about what he is going to say next. He is simply learning. The Invisible Man was finally seen, and in seeing him, the CEO finally found his own humanity. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons every week.